Greetings everyone. Myself Janesh Panchal, student of MTech in Construction Engineering and Management at CEPT University. And today I present my directed research project titled CSR Approaches of Construction Companies in India, Tokenism or Meaningful Engagement. This research was carried out under the guidance of Dr. Amit Diwatia during the spring 2026 semester. I will walk you through the context, methodology, findings, and recommendations of this study. Let me begin with a quick overview of how the presentation is structured. The study is organized into five chapters. First, introduction, which covers the context, rationale, and objectives. Then, literature review, covering the evolution of CSR, India's legal framework, construction sector practices, and research gaps which were identified. Then comes the research methodology, including the conceptual framework and how the data was collected. Then comes the data analysis, which is the heart of the study, covering the classification of CSR practices, statistical analysis, individual case studies, and execution challenges. And last comes the conclusions and recommendations, where I present the key findings and a practical improvement framework. Starting off with Chapter 1. Chapter 1 sets the stage for this entire study. It answers three fundamental questions. Why is the research needed? What are we exactly examining? And how we define the key terms used throughout. Corporate social responsibility has been institutionalized in India through the Companies Act of 2013. This legislation mandates that eligible companies allocate at least 2% of their average profits towards social development initiatives. While this has significantly improved financial compliance with CSR obligations, a critical question remains unanswered. Does compliance with spending requirements actually translate into meaningful social impact or not? The construction sector is particularly important in this context. Unlike most other industries, construction is inherently project based and site specific. Companies operate with large migrant workforces under temporary employment conditions, which face serious occupational safety challenges, and their activities directly impact the environment conditions of the surrounding communities. These characteristics place construction firms in a position of heightened social responsibility. What we actually observe in the sector is a wide spectrum of CSR practice. On one end, we have short term symbolic interventions, one day events, and isolated donations with little to no lasting impact. On the other hand, we have sustained practices deeply integrated with labor welfare, environmental management, and community development. So, why focus on the construction sector specifically? For this, we have identified five core reasons. First, the sector has extremely high social and environmental interface. That is, construction activities directly affect the migrant labor, occupational health and safety, and local communities and environmental conditions. Then comes the project based and fragmented nature of operations. Short project cycles, complex subcontracting systems, and decentralized site management frequently limit the continuity and ownership of CSR initiatives. Third comes a deeply compliance driven orientation prevails. That is, CSR in construction is often treated purely as a statutory obligation. Then comes fourth, there are like significant gaps in how existing policies are evaluated. Current CSR assessments overwhelmingly focus on expenditure figures and disclosure compliance. They say very little about the implementation quality. Fifth is limited sector specific guidelines existence. While national level CSR policies apply, construction specific frameworks addressing labor welfare, site level engagement, and community integration remain largely underdeveloped. From a policy perspective, unless we understand whether existing regulatory mechanisms promote meaningful engagement or inadequately encourage minimum compliance, we cannot design better interventions. Now moving on with the objectives of the project. Based on this rationale, we have developed seven objectives which were formulated to examine the regulatory, institutional, and organizational context influencing CSR decision making, to analyze company specific factors such as scale of operations, nature of projects, etc., to study CSR planning approaches, including theme of selection, fund allocation, and monitoring mechanisms. Next is to identify operational and organizational barriers affecting the CSR effectiveness and continuity. Then comes the central objective, that is to classify the CSR practices into tokenistic or meaningful engagement, which is based on implementation characteristics, continuity, stakeholder relevance, and transparency. Then comes the sixth objective, to synthesize the findings and identify gaps between CSR intent and actual outcomes. Last is to propose improvement measures at the company, policy, and industry levels. Before proceeding, let me define the key terms used throughout this study. Because precision in terminology is critical, corporate social responsibility in this study is understood not just as reported expenditure, but in terms of planning approach, implementation practices, and stakeholder relevance, in line with the Companies Act of 2013. Tokenistic CSR refers to practices that are primarily compliance driven or symbolic, undertaken to fulfill statutory requirements or enhance corporate image rather than to generate sustained social impact. Key characteristics include limited stakeholder engagement, low relevance to local or worker needs, absence of monitoring mechanisms, and minimal evidence of outcomes. Meaningful CSR, by contrast, refers to the practices that demonstrate genuine engagement with social labor or environmental issues integrated into organizational and project level practices. The hallmarks are long term or continuous initiatives, alignment with stakeholder needs, adequate research allocation, monitoring and documentation, etc. CSR planning is the process of identifying themes, allocating budgets, defining objectives, selecting implementation models, and determining monitoring mechanisms. Now, the CSR stakeholders. CSR stakeholders might include CSR managers, project engineers, HR and safety officers, and external actors like the workers or the local community members as well. Moving to chapter 2, the literature review builds the conceptual and theoretical foundation for the study, covering the evolution of CSR globally, the legal framework in India, construction specific practices, and the research gap the study aims to fill. The concept of CSR has evolved significantly over 7 decades. In the 1950s and 60s, CSR was a voluntary concept rooted between in Bowen's idea of social responsibilities of the businessman, which held that companies should align their decisions with societal ideals. In the 70s and 80s, the focus shifted to organized managerial techniques that prioritized stakeholder responsiveness. By the 90s and into the present, CSR became a strategic business function with contemporary interpretations emphasizing the integration of economic, social, environmental, and ethical responsibilities into the core of business operation. India's story is particularly significant. On April 1st of 2014, India became the first major economy in the world to implement a mandatory CSR framework through Section 135 of the Companies Act of 2013. This was a dramatic shift from a comply or explain approach to a stringent regulatory regime. Companies are now required to disclose their CSR policies and a committee composition required, total CSR obligation and actual expenditure, provide project-wise details including location, duration, and implementation mode, and conduct independent impact assessments for projects above 1 crore rupees. The MCA, that is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which is a regulatory body overseeing CSR, further tightened the provisions through the 2021 amendments. These require implementing agencies to register cap administrative overheads at 5% of CSR expenditures and mandate structured handling of unspent CSR funds, either transferred to government funds or set aside in an unspent CSR accounting for the ongoing projects. Within the construction sector, CSR activities in India tend to concentrate in four main areas aligned with the Schedule 7 of the Companies Act. These are education and skill development, healthcare, which includes the medical camps, sanitation facilities, and health awareness, environmental sustainability, which includes water conservation, waste management, and afforestation, and community development, that is, roads, drinking water, and community centers. However, the sector has also faces a unique set of challenges that make CSR implementation particularly difficult. First, there is a lack of awareness and expertise. Many construction managers and field staff have limited understanding of CSR concept. Second is fragmented industry structure. Third is resource constraints, especially for smaller firms and limited budget. Fourth is logistical and geographical barriers. particularly for projects in remote or rural areas. And fifth is, which is the main one, weak monitoring mechanisms, the absence of standardized metrics and accountability systems. The cumulative results of these challenges is that CSR activities in construction tend to be reactive, short term, and compliance driven rather than strategic and impact oriented. The literature identifies several critical dimensions of effective CSR. In terms of strategic planning, needs assessment is the key. Effective CSR starts with genuinely understanding the community needs through consultation with local communities, NGOs, and governmental organizations. However, the research consistently shows that CSR programs are often designed to top down, with corporate management making decisions rather than communities. And alignment with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, that is the SDGs, has become a strategic priority through the company. Though the companies tend to select SDGs related to healthcare, education, and economic growth, where the results are visible, while underrepresenting goals related to biodiversity and climate action. In terms of implementation, the literature describes a multi-tier framework where a board-level CSR committee develops a policy, an executive team coordinates, and local partners carry out field execution. This is ideal, but in reality, excessive reliance on NGOs introduces risks like limited corporate control over implementation quality, third party dependency, and potential misalignment between corporate objectives and community needs. On monitoring and evaluation, and this is a critical weakness, research consistently shows that M&E is among the weakest aspects of CSR implementation, especially in developing countries and industries like construction. Companies use metrics like which include beneficiary numbers, expenditure comparisons, and process timeliness. These are the output matrix. What's largely missing is the outcome and impact measurement, long-term changes in community well-being, sustainability of interventions, and SDG linkages. The literature clearly recommends a shift from output-based to outcome-based evaluation, supported by digital tools and standardized metrics. Chapter 3 describes how the study was designed and executed. Let me walk you through the research design, the conceptual framework, and the data collection methods used. The study adopts a mixed method research design combining secondary data analysis with primary stakeholder data, ensuring triangulation and a comprehensive assessment that goes well beyond the statutory compliance reporting. 16 construction companies were selected through a criterion based sampling. The selection criteria were applicability of mandatory CSR provisions under the Companies Act engagement in construction activities including real estate development, EPC and infrastructure projects, availability of CSR related disclosures in annual or sustainability reports, and operational under presence if in active project environments. Under Section 135 of Companies Act 2013, a company is required to undertake CSR activities if it meets one of the three criteria: net worth of 500 crore rupees or more, turnover of 1000 crore rupees or more, or net profit of 5 crore rupees or more. Companies meeting these thresholds must allocate at least 2% of their average net profits of the preceding three financial years towards the CSR activity. The study covers three consecutive financial years, starting from 22 to 25. This 3 year span allows for trend analysis, continuity assessment, and the identification of consistency or fluctuations in CSR planning and expenditure. In total, 21 evaluation indicators were used, structured across four categories of the CSR lifecycle. Moving on with the conceptual framework. It is a five-layer structural evaluation model, and this is the backbone of the entire analysis. The framework was specifically designed to move beyond financial disclosures and examine the full spectrum of CSR practice. Layer 1 is the external and internal context. This is the input layer. It captures the conditions within which the CSR decisions are made. These include the regulatory factors such as the Companies Act provisions and industry norms, company specific factors including size, turnover, nature of projects, and organizational commitment and resource availability, as well as the budget constraints, HR limitations, and time pressures from project driven schedules. Layer 2 is the CSR planning and methodology. This is the process layer. It examines what companies say they will do, theme selection, fund allocation, SDG alignment, and how they plan to do it, whether through one-time or long-term programs, and direct implementation or NGO partnerships. Layer 3 is implementation reality. This is a practice layer and arguably the revealing one. It examines the gap between the intent and execution. What actually happens on the ground? Is there continuity and follow up? Are CSR activities integrated with construction operations such as labor welfare and environmental management? What are the operational barriers, budget overruns, limited site ownerships, etc.? Layer 4 is the outcome classification, the evaluation layer. Based on the evidence from the previous three layers, CSR practices are classified as either tokenistic or meaningful using a structured binary scoring system. Layer 5 is the stakeholder feedback. This is the feedback loop. The internal stakeholders such as CSR managers, engineers, HR officers, they provide a feedback on practical challenges and resource limitations. And external stakeholders such as workers, communities, they provide feedback on the relevance and usefulness of the initiatives. Through this layer, this provides the ground truth. Moving on with the data collection methods. Secondary data was collected from the annual reports and CSR disclosures of all the 16 construction companies for 3 financial years. This included the financial and eligibility indicators, turnover, net worth, average net profit, and a statutory 2% obligation. Next is the primary data collection. The primary data was collected through a structured questionnaire to CSR concerned CSR management personnel. The questionnaire was designed to validate the reported practices, understand the implementation realities, and capture managerial perspectives on planning, depth, continuity, monitoring, and barriers. The quantification approach is straightforward. 21 binary indicators were developed. Each indicator scores 1 if the practice is followed and 0 if not. Responses were collected for all 3 years, giving a maximum possibility score of 63 per company. Companies were then classified using a benchmark of mean plus standard deviation, ensuring that only companies performing significantly above average are classified as meaningful CSR and those below are classified as tokenistic. We now move on to chapter 4, data analysis part. A total of 11 respondents participated in the primary survey. In terms of designation, 63.6% are CSR committee members, the people directly involved in CSR planning and decision making. The remaining respondents include CSR heads, project monitoring officers, sustainability officers, a developer, a CFO, and a company secretary. In terms of experience, 36.4% have more than 5 years of experience in the CSR monitoring, the single largest group. 27.3% each falls into 1 to 3 years of experience and 3 to 5 year categories. Only 9.1% of people have less than 1 years of experience in CSR management. By the company type, we can see that 72.7% belong to infrastructure companies, 36.4% belongs to construction companies, and 9.1% to developer organizations. For CSR budget size, the largest group is 45.5% operates within a budget of below 50 lakhs. The remaining companies are equally distributed among 50 lakhs to 2 crores and 2 crores to 5 crore and above 5 crore categories at 18.2% each. This variation in budget size is important because it ensures the study captures of CSR behavior across the organizational scales. The classification framework uses the 21 indicators spanning the full CSR lifecycle. The first 7 indicators cover CSR planning and selection. The next 4 indicators cover the implementation part of the CSR activities. The next covers the monitoring and evaluation indicators, those are the 6 of them. And the last 4 covers the reporting and continuity of the CSR activities. So, for the results, the 11 companies were analyzed and scored as follows. Company case 1 was scored as 20 out of 63, and company case 2 was 54 out of 63, and we can see the results. The result is striking that only 3 companies, that is case study 2 with 54, case study 10 with 57, and case study 11 with 57, crossing the benchmark of threshold. That means only 27.3% of companies demonstrate meaningful CSR. The remaining 8 companies, that is 72.7% are classified as tokenistic. The mean score across all the 11 companies is 33 and the standard deviation is 18. This gives us a benchmark threshold of 51, that is, mean plus standard deviation. Companies scoring above 51 are classified as meaningful CSR and those below are classified as tokenistic CSR. To examine the association between CSR practices and their effectiveness across companies, I used the phi coefficient and Kramer's V, which measures the association between particularly suitable for binary, that is yes no variables, which is exactly the structure of this dataset. Both measures yielded identical values, enabling a unified interpretation. Values range from 0 to 1, with higher values indicating stronger association. Six indicators show perfect association, a phi value of exactly 1. These are formal needs assessment before project selection, identification and engagement of suitable NGOs, alignment with local requirements, alignment with companies' business operations, continuity of CSR project beyond initial launch, and continuation of projects irrespective of media or public attention. These six form the core foundation of meaningful CSR. They distinguish structured, sustained initiatives and superficial compliance. A large majority of other indicators show strong association between between 1 and zero point 0.9. These include baseline data collection and community consultation at 0.943 and 0.95 951, long-term implementation beyond 1 year at 0.95, and inclusion of measurable outcomes indicators at 0.94. And the structured M&E and impact focused monitoring and beneficiary feedback and adaptive improvements, as well as the impact based reporting and proactive CSR initiation. Three indicators show moderate association, which is between zero point 0.8 and 0.89. These are alignment with national and state priorities, focus on capacity building initiatives, and preparation of impact assessment reports, which is one of the necessary requirements. And critically, two major indicators show the lowest association of all, which is between zero point 0.5 and 0.79. Indicator 14, which is engagement of third party evaluation agencies, and indicator 18, which is the public disclosure of CSR activities. This this finding is profound. Companies are good at internal planning and alignment, but they are reluctant to allow external scrutiny or to be fully transparent publicly. This is a major accountability gap which was observed. Now, moving further, to test whether CSR performance has changed significantly across the three financial years, a one-way ANOVA was connected. The null hypothesis was such that there is no significant difference in CSR performances across across the 3 years. The results show that most of the companies have p values greater than zero point 0.5, meaning the CSR activity has not changed significantly over 3 years. Companies 3, 6, 10, and 11 show a perfect consistency values of P, that is 1. For cases 10 and 11, the meaningful CSR companies, this is excellent news that consistently high average scores of zero point 0.9 reflect stable, well developed practices. And for case 3 and 6, the same consistency comes with moderate average scores and approximately zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.1, suggesting stability without improvement, that is stagnation and not strength at all. Cases 4, 5, and 7 show low scores with high p values, consistently underperforming sustained over 3 years. This is a critical insight. Consistency doesn't always mean that effectiveness, it can also mean that consistently weak CSR. The one standout finding is company case 2, the only company with a statistical significant result. With p value of 0.0003, its scores improved sharply from 0.62 in the year 22-23 to 0.95 in 23-24 to a perfectly 1 in the year 24-25. This is not a random variation. It represents a clear, deliberate, and upward trajectory. Company case 2 is the only example in this study of genuine CSR and maturity in progress, having actively strengthened its planning, monitoring systems, and impact driven initiatives over 3 year period. Let me examine the three companies which were classified as demonstrating meaningful CSR. Company case 2 scored 54 out of 63. It operates with a budget of 50 lakhs to 2 crores and consistently spend significantly above its statutory obligation, generating surplus CSR amounts each year. For instance, in the year 22-23, the obligation was 18.12 lakhs and the company spent 38.96 lakhs, more than double. CSR initiatives are structured as multi-year projects focused on education, healthcare, livelihood, and environmental sustainability concentrated around Gujarat. What distinguishes this company above all of this improvement trajectory, as confirmed by the ANOVA result, it is the only company actively evolving its CSR approach. Company case 10 and company case 11, they have scored 57 out of 63, and both of them are above the 5 crore CSR budget. It demonstrates a mature CSR framework driven by community need assessment, long term impact, monitoring and alignment, and both government priorities and regulatory requirements. What distinguishes both of these companies is its approach to continuation decisions. It evaluates whether to continue projects based on their relevance to community needs, measurable impact, ESG alignment, and scalability. The three meaningful CSR companies share five common characteristics: multi year projects, outcome focused monitoring, community need assessment, ESG alignments, and measurable impact indicators. Now, examining the patterns of the tokenistic CSR companies. Company case 1 scored 20 out of 63, despite having a strong financial profile with with a turnover growing from approximately 19,266 crores to 24,624 crores and a CSR budget of 2 to 5 crores. The company fully met its obligation in all 3 years. The tokenistic classification arises from its execution challenges, that is, the dispersed project sites, complicate monitoring, field data collection being unreliable, impact and measurement not being standardized, and there are coordination gap between the internal teams, NGOs, and the local stakeholders. Then comes the company case 3. There was no CSR activity in the subsequent 2 years, so the approach was purely compliance driven. Then comes the company case 4. The main problem which they faced was there was no structured monitoring frameworks whatsoever, and the average score sits from 0 to 0.05 across all the years, which is negligible. Then comes the company case 6, which is the most alarming one. It exceeds its obligation in 2023, but in 2024 but in the year 23-24, despite an obligation of 3.61 crores, spending was zero, and in the year 24-25, against an obligation 4.3 crores spending, again it was zero. The root cause identified is the complete absence of the dedicated CSR team. Last is the company case 7. The entire obligation of 40.88 lakhs was remained unspent in the year 23-24. This attributed to the complete absence of the monitoring and evaluation mechanism. Looking across all the tokenistic companies, five common patterns emerge: one-time activities rather than sustained programs, compliance-driven motivation, no dedicated CSR teams, weak or absent monitoring, and frequent underutilization of the allocated funds. Based on the primary survey gathered from the stakeholders, the major execution challenges identified across all the companies were: first, impact measurement. Most organizations lack well defined KPIs and rely on basic output indicators, beneficiary numbers, and activities completed, making it impossible to assess long term social impact. Second is coordination issues. Multiple stakeholders, including internal teams, NGOs, government bodies, and communities, are involved, but weak collaboration and communication gaps leads to inefficiencies and misaligned objectives. Third is resource constraints. The absence of dedicated CSR teams and technical expertise severely limits planning capability and monitoring capacity. Fourth is monitoring difficulties. Geographically dispersed construction sites make tracking extremely difficult, and digital monitoring tools are rarely used. Fifth is data collection problems. Inconsistent and incomplete field data affects reporting reliability and makes outcome based evaluation nearly impossible. Summarizing the key findings, The first one is that financial compliance is largely maintained. Most companies meet the statutory 2% of CSR spending, but compliance does not indicate that meaningful CSR engagement. Second is only 27.3%, that is 3 out of 11 companies demonstrate meaningful CSR. There is a vast majority in the meaningful CSR category. Third is companies are strong internally but weak externally. The Phi and Kramersby analysis shows us that companies excel at internal planning and alignment and continuity, but the two lowest scoring indicators are third party evaluation and public disclosure. Companies prefer to keep CSR under their own control rather than subject it to independent scrutiny or transparent reporting. The fourth finding is consistency does not equal effectiveness. 9 out of 11 companies show no significant variation in the performance across 3 years, but most of these consistency reflects the perpetuation of low impact practices rather than sustained meaningful engagement. The key exception is only company case 2, which was previously mentioned. The fifth finding is major gaps persist, that is, weak monitoring, inadequate and impact assessment, limited stakeholder engagement, etc., are the structural barriers preventing the transition from compliance to meaningful engagement. Now, moving on to the final chapter, conclusions and recommendations. The recommendations are structured at three levels: company, policy, and industry. Starting off with company level recommendations. First is to establish dedicated CSR teams or designate focal persons with clear defined roles and responsibilities for planning, implementation, and monitoring. Strengthening institutional ownership is foundational to everything else. Second is to adopt a strategic approach to CSR planning through formal needs assessment, alignment with community priorities, and linkage of CSR initiatives with the broader project lifecycle. Third is build a stronger partnership with credible NGOs and local institutions for execution, particularly where companies face operational or capacity related constraints. Fourth is strengthen monitoring and evaluation through structured tools, outcome indicators, beneficiary feedback systems, and periodic impact reviews. This moves the CSR assessment beyond financial compliance towards a genuinely outcome based approach. Fifth is to integrate CSR with core construction operations, particularly labor welfare, occupational safety, and environmental management. CSR should be embedded within the broader organizational practices and not treated as a separate compliance function. Moving on with the policy level recommendations. At policy level, we should develop sector specific CSR guidelines for the construction industry addressing labor welfare, site level engagement, and community integration. Establishing knowledge sharing platforms for industry wide exchange of best practices, aligning CSR planning with regional socio development priorities and state level development goals to enhance relevance, strengthen impact assessment requirements for larger and long term CSR projects, which mandating outcome based reporting rather than just expenditure disclosure, and enhance transparency requirements to ensure public disclosures include impact narratives, before and after comparisons, and measurable outcomes. The last comes the industry level recommendations. At the industry level, encourage adoption of digital monitoring tools for real time tracking, data analytics, and transparency, especially for geographically dispersed projects. Invest in capacity building through training programs for CSR managers, project teams, and field personnel. Develop standardized industry level performance metrics to enable benchmarking and comparative evaluation. Establish a recognition mechanism for exemplary CSR practices to incentivize companies to move beyond the minimum compliance. And finally, to promote collaborative multi stakeholder initiatives for larger scale community development efforts that no single company can tackle all of the alone. This DRP is set out to examine whether CSR practices adopted by construction companies in India reflect genuine social commitment or remain limited to compliance driven activities. The primary conclusion is clear. While most construction companies meet statutory spending requirements, many initiatives remain short term, output focused, and weakly integrated with project level operations. Only 27.3 companies demonstrate sustained outcome oriented CSR practices. The sector as a whole remains at a transitional stage, that is, positioned between compliance and meaningful engagement. Tokenism also prevails in it. Like most of the companies exhibit compliance driven activities with weak monitoring and limited stakeholder engagement. Implementation gaps are structural, like dispersed sites, resource constraints, absence of dedicated teams, and external validation is also weak. In terms of research contribution, the study makes four specific contributions to the field. First, a sector focused evaluative framework, the first comprehensive framework specifically designed for the construction companies addressing project based operations and migrant labor context. Second is a quantitative classification system, a binary scoring system with 21 indicators enabling objective, replicable classification of CSR activities. Third, a statistical validation. Phi and Kramersby analysis identifies which practices have the strongest association with the CSR effectiveness and providing evidence based guidance. Fourth is a longitudinal analysis. The 3-year trend study reveals the pattern of consistency, improvement, and stagnation that would be invisible in a single year study. The path forward is clear. Move from compliance driven to impact oriented CSR through dedicated resources, strategic planning, robust monitoring and evaluation, enhance community participation, beneficiary feedback, and external validation. To conclude, this research finds that meaningful CSR does exist within the construction sector in India, but it remains limited and unevenly distributed. The broader pattern continues to reflect compliance driven approaches. However, the examples of companies 10 and 11, and especially 2, demonstrate that meaningful CSR is achievable, even within a challenging project based and resource constrained industry. The question is whether the sector as a whole has the will to do and move in that direction. Thank you so much.